The scent of cedar and expensive tobacco always reminded me of my father, Stefan, but that day, the air over our estate in Küsnacht was tainted by the encrypted stench of burning memories. It has been 8 months since the cancer took him, leaving a void in the heart of our family that no amount of Swiss inheritance could fill. My brother, Julian, and I were left to navigate the silent corridors of our villa, a house that held the weight of a will specifically designed to protect us. Stefan had been a man of meticulous order, a private banker who understood that security was not just about gold bars in a vault, but about the legal walls he built around his children. He left everything to us, the house, the accounts, the history. Our mother, Elena, received nothing, a cold legal reality that ignited a fury in her eyes I had never seen before. The tension between them was an old, deep-seated rot. Elena had never truly embraced the quiet dignity of our life. She had abandoned us when I was just a child, vanishing into the neon lights of Europe for 2 years, leaving Stefan and our grandparents to raise me in the shadow of the Alps. When she returned 4 years later, weeping and offering a hollow story of regret, Stefan's kind heart betrayed his logic. He allowed her back into our sanctuary, perhaps for my sake, but the connection was severed forever. I grew up watching a woman who felt more like a distant tenant than a mother, someone who criticized my lack of femininity and my preference for hiking boots over high heels. She treated Julian's birth not as a blessing, but as a biological burden, blaming Stefan for the weight she gained and the freedom she lost. Her resentment was a physical presence in the house, a shadow that even Stefan's unwavering patience couldn't dispel. Then came the diagnosis, the grueling rounds of chemotherapy in Lucerne, and the slow fading of a giant. While my father fought for every breath, Elena was already looking for his replacement. I discovered the truth on a Tuesday afternoon when I returned early from the University of Zurich. The sounds coming from their bedroom weren't those of mourning, but of betrayal. I saw her with a man, a total stranger, lying in the bed Stefan had bought for her. She didn't apologize. She gaslighted me, whispering that telling my dying father would be the act that finally killed him. So I carried the poison of her secret in silence, watching her disappear for nights on end, returning with the smell of foreign cologne and cheap gin, while Stefan withered away. The funeral was a somber affair under a gray Swiss sky, but Elena's mourning was a performance that deserved a stage in Geneva. Within months, the performance ended. She disappeared to Lugano and returned with a wedding ring and a man named Beat. He moved into our family home, as if he had built it himself, claiming the title of father with a nauseating cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. But Beat wasn't just a rebound. He was an intruder. I watched from the balcony as he and Elena threw Stefan's vintage books and framed photos onto the pavement like common refuse. When Julian tried to stop them, Beat sneered at him, telling my brother to get over his dead man's grief, because a real man was now in charge. However, something felt orchestrated. Among the belongings Beat had discarded was an old Patek Philippe box Stefan had kept in his study. Inside I found not a watch, but a small, encrypted USB drive and a note addressed to a man named Dr. Urs Weber. This was where the narrative shifted. I reached out to Weber, thinking he was just another stiff-collared notary from Paradeplatz. When we met at a secluded cafe in the old town, he didn't look like a lawyer. His eyes were too sharp, his movements too calculated. He spoke of Stefan not as a client, but as a partner. Weber revealed that Stefan had suspected Elena's infidelity long before the cancer. But he also suspected something darker, that his friend, Fabienne, Elena's constant companion, was funneling information about the bank's internal security to an outside party. Weber began helping me with the eviction process, but his advice was strangely specific. He pushed me to look into Beat's history. It turns out Beat wasn't a stranger at all. He was a disgraced former employee of a rival firm, someone Fabienne had introduced to Elena years ago. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. Elena hadn't just cheated, she had been coached to wait for the inheritance. Not realizing, Stefan had already seen the moves on the chessboard and cut her out completely. As I served the official notice to leave, Elena's victim act began, but it was Beat's reaction that confirmed Weber's suspicions. He didn't just yell, he threatened me with consequences that sounded more like professional hits than family squabbles. He was desperate because the house held something he needed, a set of access codes Stefan had hidden in the foundation of our childhood home. The final confrontation happened on a cold evening when the fog rolled off the lake, swallowing the villa in white. I had already moved Julian to a safe house, a move Weber had insisted upon. When I entered the study, I found Elena and Beat frantically tearing at the floorboards. There was no more pretense of being a new family. Beat looked at me with a cold, predatory gaze, while Elena just sobbed about how I was ruining her life. But then Fabienne walked in. She wasn't there to comfort Elena. She was holding a folder, her face a mask of corporate ice. It became clear then, Elena was merely the key they used to get inside, a useful fool blinded by her own narcissism. Fabienne was the one pulling the strings, hoping to find the codes to Stefan's private ledgers. I realized then that Dr. Urs Weber wasn't just a lawyer, he was a private investigator. Stefan had hired to ensure that if he couldn't protect us in life, he would do so from the grave. Weber appeared in the doorway, not with a briefcase, but with 2 officers from the cantonal police. The trespassing charges I had threatened were just the beginning. The evidence on the USB drive, combined with the security footage I had installed, linked Beat and Fabienne to a larger scheme of industrial espionage. As they were led away, Elena reached out for me, her voice trembling, but I saw only the woman, who had let her children's heritage be burned in a backyard fire. I didn't say a word. I simply handed her the last remaining photo of our family, the one Beat had missed, and watched her realize she was truly alone. Now the house is silent again, but the air is clear. Julian and I have changed the locks, not just on the doors, but on our lives. We are the keepers of Stefan's legacy, a team that survived the fire and the frost. The Swiss legal system moved with its typical quiet efficiency, ensuring that the villa remained ours and that the strangers would never return. For the first time since my father's diagnosis, I can look out over the water and feel a sense of peace. The shadows have been banished, and though the drama of our bloodline is scarred by betrayal, the foundation we stand on is finally solid. The USB drive felt like a lead weight in my pocket as I stood in the center of the devastated study. With Beat and Elena gone, the silence of the villa was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with the secrets. Stefan had spent decades weaving into the very stones of this place. I spent the next 3 days in a feverish haze of digital decryption and architectural analysis. The files on the drive weren't just bank records. They were a map of my father's life. A life lived in the gray areas where high finance meets geopolitical security. The codes I had found weren't for a digital wallet or a remote vault in the Grisons. They were coordinates, measurements, and a series of pneumatic instructions that pointed directly beneath the library floor. I remembered Stefan spending hours in that room, the smell of old parchment and the clicking of his mechanical clocks. He wasn't just reading, he was monitoring the pulse of the house. Julian helped me move the heavy mahogany shelves, his face set in a grim expression that made him look decades older. Underneath the intricate parquet flooring, we found a seam so fine it was almost invisible to the naked eye. Applying the sequence of pressures Stefan had detailed, a rhythm like a coded heartbeat, the floor didn't just open, it breathed. A hidden compartment rose with the hiss of old hydraulics. Inside sat a heavy burnished steel box, emblazoned with a crest I didn't recognize, not the bank's, and certainly not our family's. It was the mark of the Sovereign Silence, an old, unofficial guild of Swiss wealth, managers who operated outside the standard regulatory frameworks. My father hadn't just been a banker. He was a gatekeeper for some of the world's most sensitive assets. As I reached for the box, the security lights I had installed flickered. On the monitor, a silhouette moved across the lawn. It wasn't the police, and it wasn't the clumsy figures of Elena or Beat. It was someone who moved with the grace of a ghost. I realized then that while I had been hunting for the truth, someone else had been hunting me. The helper who had guided me to this moment. Dr. Urs Weber was no longer answering his phone. The cold realization dawned on me. He hadn't cleared the house for our protection. He had cleared it so there would be no witnesses to what happened next. The silhouette outside didn't break in. Instead, the front door lock clicked open with a chilling familiarity. I realized too late that Weber hadn't just been a lawyer. He was the one who had designed the villa's security system years ago. I pulled Julian into the shadows of the servants' staircase, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The man who entered wasn't the polished professional I had met in the cafe. Weber wore a tactical coat, and in his hand was a device that hummed with electronic interference, neutralizing the very cameras I thought would save us. He walked straight to the library, his footsteps echoing with the confidence of a king returning to his throne. He didn't even look around. He knew exactly where the safe was. I watched through the gap in the door as he knelt by the steel box, his fingers dancing over the keypad with a speed that suggested he had practiced this thousands of times. But there was a second player on the board. From the terrace entrance, a woman stepped into the light. It was Marcella, the quiet librarian from the university who had helped me with my research months ago. I had thought our meeting was a coincidence, a shared interest in Swiss history. But as she stood there, holding a silenced pistol aimed directly at Weber's head, I realized there were no coincidences in Stefan's world. She didn't speak a word of greeting. She simply watched him, her eyes as cold as the glaciers of the Bernese Oberland. Weber froze, his hand hovering over the open lid of the box. He didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed. He whispered something about the agreement and the final ledger. Terms that meant nothing to me but clearly meant everything to her. This wasn't a robbery. It was a reclamation. I was caught between a man who had manipulated my grief and a woman who had been stalking my intellect, both of them after the contents of a box that was supposed to be my inheritance. I realized then that the family drama with my mother was just a smokescreen, a petty distraction designed to keep my eyes off the real war, being waged in the shadows of my father's legacy. The steel box clicked open not with the sound of gold, but with the dry, rhythmic rustle of high-grade vellum, documents that held the literal lifeblood of Swiss banking secrecy. From my vantage point in the shadows of the servants' staircase, I watched as Marcella kept her weapon. Trained on Weber, the silence between them was a physical weight, broken only by the distant, rhythmic ticking of a clock that Stefan had always insisted on winding himself. Weber's hands, usually so steady when signing legal briefs, trembled as he pulled out a leather-bound ledger. He didn't look like a thief. He looked like a man staring at his own death warrant. As he flipped through the pages, I saw the reflection of red wax seals and intricate signatures. It wasn't just money. It was a list of names, politicians, CEOs, and families whose names were etched into the very stones of Zurich and Geneva. My father hadn't just been a banker. He had been the confessor for the elite, the man who knew where every skeleton was buried in the pristine alpine landscape. The realization hit me with the force of an avalanche. Elena's affair with Beat, their clumsy attempt to take the house, the burning of the books. It had all been a stage-managed distraction. Marcella wasn't there to protect the law. She was the cleaner for the sovereign silence, sent to ensure that these names never saw the light of a courtroom. She had used me, feeding me crumbs of information about my mother, to keep me occupied while she scouted the villa. But then, the plot twisted further. Weber didn't hand over the ledger. Instead, he pulled a small silver lighter from his pocket. In that moment, the villainous lawyer became something else. He wasn't trying to steal the secrets. He was trying to destroy them. He looked toward the shadow where I was hiding, his eyes locking onto mine for a fleeting second. It was a look of profound apology. He had allowed me to hate him, had played the part of the manipulative opportunist, all to draw the guild's shadow into the light so he could burn it all down. The flare of the lighter ignited more than just the paper. As the first page of the ledger caught fire, Marcella's composure shattered. The quiet librarian lunged forward, not to shoot, but to save the secrets that were her organization's currency. In the chaos, Julian, who had been silent and trembling beside me, suddenly moved. But he didn't run away. He reached into his hiking jacket and pulled out a remote trigger I had never seen. My little brother, the one I thought I was protecting, had been the third player on the board all along. He had been Stefan's true apprentice. While I was focused on the legalities and the drama of our mother, Julian had been working with Weber in secret, installing a thermite charge beneath the very floorboards we had just ripped up. He wasn't the victim of this story. He was the executioner of our father's final wish. The explosion wasn't loud. It was a focused, intense hiss of chemical fire that turned the library's foundation into an incinerator. The ledger, the steel box, and the secrets of the sovereign silence vanished in a white-hot glow that illuminated the room like a midsummer sun. Marcella screamed, a sound of pure professional failure, as she realized the leverage she had sought was now nothing but ash. Weber stood back, the light of the fire reflecting in his glasses, a weary smile touching his lips. He had sacrificed his reputation and nearly his life to ensure that Julian and I would never be hunted for what our father knew. The inheritance Stefan left us wasn't the gold or the villa. It was the freedom of having no secrets left to guard. As the smoke began to fill the room, and the distant sirens of the Zurich police finally wailed in the night, I looked at my brother and realized that the family drama was over. The war was won, not with a lawyer's pen, but with a child's fire. The air in the visitors' room of the Zurich Cantonal Detention Center was sterile, smelling of industrial bleach and the faint, metallic tang of suppressed desperation. I sat across from Elena, separated by a thick pane of reinforced glass that seemed to magnify the wrinkles of age and bitterness on her face. She looked smaller, stripped of her designer silks and the predatory confidence she had worn like armor. She didn't look like a mother. She looked like a gambler, who had bet her soul on a losing hand and was now trying to negotiate with the house. Her hands were pressed against the glass, her lips moving in a frantic, silent plea for the hidden accounts she was certain I had found. She still believed in the myth of the golden parachute, the Swiss legend, of the secret vault that would solve all her problems. I didn't need to speak to tell her the truth. I simply held up the small, charred remnant of the ledger's cover that I had retrieved from the cooling embers of the library floor. I watched as her eyes darted from the scrap of leather to my face, searching for a sign of a lie. There was no dialogue between us, only the heavy, suffocating weight of realization. I showed her the legal documents Weber had finalized, the complete dissolution of Stefan's assets into a series of charitable trusts in Liechtenstein that she could never touch. Every betrayal she had committed, every night she had spent with Beat planning the takeover of our home, and every memory of my father she had attempted to burn, it had all led her to this moment of absolute clinical poverty. Her face didn't break into tears. It froze into a mask of pure, crystalline horror as she realized that she hadn't just lost the money. She had lost the game Stefan had started playing long before he ever got sick. The final blow was when I showed her a photo of Julian and me standing on the shore of Lake Lucerne, vibrant and free. I watched the light die in her eyes. When she saw the expression on Julian's face, not one of hatred, but of total indifference. He wasn't her victim anymore. He was a stranger who shared her blood but none of her spirit. I stood up and walked away, leaving her pressed against the glass, a ghost in a cage. As I walked out into the crisp, biting wind of the Swiss afternoon, I felt the final thread of our connection snap. She had wanted a tragedy, a drama of betrayal and inheritance, but all she was left with were the cold ashes of an ambition that had never been hers to fulfill. A year has passed since the fire in the library, and the villa in Küsnacht has been sold to a tech entrepreneur from Zug. Julian and I've moved to a small, secluded chalet in the shadows of the Matterhorn, near Zermatt. The world thinks we are merely the lucky heirs of a private banker, living quietly on the remnants of a modest fortune. But the reality is far more intricate. We don't spend our days hiking or skiing. We spend them monitoring the silent digital pulse that Stefan left behind. We discovered that the sovereign silence wasn't just a ledger of names. It was a network, a system of checks and balances designed to prevent the very corruption that Marcella and her organization sought to exploit. We weren't just given money. We were given a job. The intrigue didn't end with the fire. Every few weeks a package arrives at our door, unmarked and untraceable, containing a single mechanical watch component. When assembled, they form a complex, ancient-looking chronometer that serves as a key to a different encrypted server. It was Stefan's ultimate plot twist. He didn't destroy the secrets to protect the world. He destroyed them to ensure only his bloodline could control the narrative. Dr. Urs Weber still visits us, though now he comes as a mentor rather than a lawyer. He revealed that the man I saw in my mother's bed, Beat, had been a plant, a pawn sent by Weber himself to test my loyalty and my mother's greed. The betrayal I thought I had discovered was a staged experiment, a crucible designed to see if I was strong enough to inherit the silence. The most chilling realization came on a Tuesday night, while Julian was calibrating the newest watch. He found a hidden engraving on the inner gear, a date that hadn't happened yet, December 15th of next year, and a single name, mine. I realized then that my father's death might have been the final piece of his own grand design, a way to vanish from the board while leaving his children as the ultimate players. We are no longer just victims of a family drama or witnesses to a detective story. We are the architects of a new shadow, the keepers of a secret that the rest of Switzerland will never know exists. As the snow begins to fall over the peaks, I look at the watch and wonder, did I choose this life? Or was every step I took, every choice I made, already written in the gears of my father's meticulous, silent heart?